So where I'm at in the US right now, a lot of states are experiencing some severe winter weather, although I think in my state it's going to be more of just raining and potentially a freeze. So I'm fully expecting to see a plethora of all these different videos people are going to be putting out, reading vlogs, chatty little catch-ups of what they did during the snowstorm weekend. So I thought I'd use this time to film as well, but I'm going old school with a tag. Do people still do tags? I don't know. I think I missed the bus on that, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I wasn't on BookTube until last year and I enjoy watching tags, and recently I came across the tarot book tag. I have not been able to find the original video, so I'm gonna do some research on that, hopefully link it down below, as well as some of the other videos that I've watched. Basically, this is going to be using several of the major arcana cards, and you just, pick a book for each prompt. The deck I'm using for this is the Star Spinner Tarot by Trungles, who I believe is also the creator of the Magic Fish graphic novel, but this is the first deck I ever got back in 2020. It's very inclusive of body type and ethnicity, and it's inspired by a lot of different mythology. So you have Asian representation of mythologies, and there's also like some stereotypical fairy tales, what you'd expect from European myth. It's a really fun deck. I have thoroughly enjoyed working with it. Quick note, this is actually a bit of a revised tag. All of the videos I've seen have 10 prompts. They focus on 10 of the major arcana. And because I'm extra and wanted to do more, I've actually added an extra 3 to the mix. So I'll be doing 13 questions or 13 prompts. And I did end up changing one of the originals a bit and switching that prompt for one of the cards I've added, but we'll get into that. So prompt number 1 is The Fool, and it's a book that has nostalgic memories for you. Hear me out. Please hear me out. I read Stephen King's It in, I believe it was April of 2020. Oddly enough, it was right after I got this tarot deck, but it was also during the early weeks of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown, and the first lockdown, I guess. I read this book after having watched It Chapter 2 in 2019, and something about watching that second film, because I had seen part 1 and then watching part 2, something with that second film, the fear that I had had of Pennywise and this franchise since I was probably 5 years old just disappeared. Like, I grew up being terrified of the Tim Curry Pennywise and was coerced, I will say, very kindly by my brother-in-law into going to see the remakes. And during the first film, I think I had my eyes squinted maybe like 80% of the time. But somehow, some way, when I watched the second one, I was perfectly fine. I wasn't fazed. And I ended up like getting really interested in the fandom and the franchise in general. So I picked up this book. I was self-isolating. I was at home with my parents. We weren't really going anywhere. And the reason this brings back nostalgic memories is because while it was a very dire, difficult time, during that period itself, I was able to just be with my family and spend time with them in a way that I hadn't been able to while in grad school. And it kind of just, I feel, with the way that the Losers Club in this book, the way that they show care for one another and find their tribe, find their people, I was able to appreciate that more because I was forced to spend time with my family, but I did really enjoy it. And so I look back on this reading experience in a really positive way. And honestly, I don't know what I'm thinking. I might reread this year. It's just, I don't know. That's a big commitment. But yes, I do have a lot of nostalgia for it. Question number 2 is for The Magician. This is actually the one I've changed the prompt for, which in my version is now a magic system or world that you really enjoyed. I never hear anybody talk about this book, but it's Aunt Tigress by Emily Shujuan. This is definitely urban fantasy, but not like anything I've read before because it's set in Toronto, I think, and is following a very diverse cast of characters. Our main character is Chinese American, but you also have First Nations representation. On top of that, you're also getting some of the more stereotypical European magic, so think different types of fairies. But all of these work in harmony, and ultimately it's showing the way that a city such as Toronto, with all these different influences and people, is so multi-ethnic. What's so interesting here, though, is that Chin is showing them collide through our main character, who is half human, half tiger. And what's so cool to me, not cool, but the commentary on it is really cool, is that we are seeing different characters from different histories and backgrounds kind of like claim other people's magic for themselves. And I think we see that a lot of times with like white characters co-opting, people of color's myths and histories. But here you have people of color doing it to other people of color, and so there's a nuance to it that I haven't seen talked about, but I found really interesting. I didn't bother explaining what it's about, because I feel like most everyone knows, but Aunt Tigress is following our main character, Tam, who, as I said, is half human, half tiger, and her aunt has been murdered, and she's trying to figure out who killed her. There's different levels of magic, of like dimension hopping. It's really weird, but it's really cool. Prompt 3 is The Empress, and that's a book with a very maternal figure. I thought really hard about this because looking at my bookshelves, I realized maybe I need to broaden my reading and bring in some books that have more motherly figures, complex motherly figures. But what I settled on was Elizabeth Bennet from Wolfsong. She is the wolf mother. She is mothering not just her children, but all these men in her life. And I just wish we saw more of her because I really like her. What I really appreciate, though, about Elizabeth is that she very often makes mistakes. And over the course of the books, you see her own up to them and realize that while she did make mistakes, at the time she thought she was doing what was best for her children. And I really like that because we assume that parents should be all-knowing and infallible when really they are just people doing their very best, and Elizabeth is a really good example of that. Another thing I like about Elizabeth, and I guess it's a testament to Clune's writing, is that depending on whose perspective you're in with her, you see her in a little bit of a different light. And almost always she's so polished, so put together, she's like this dreamy painter, and yet in the short story that we get from her perspective, you see her rage, you see her frustrations and her longing. And I really like her as a character. I wish there were more women throughout the Wolfsong books, but I really do love Elizabeth. Prompt 4 is for the lovers, so it's your favorite romantic relationship. Don't come at me, but right now, Moran and Chuaning from The Husky and His White Cat Shizun, also known as Urha, also known as Tuha. Do I recommend this book to people? No. No, I don't. But also, you should read it. This is the first volume in, I think it's going to be 11 volumes, an 11-volume Danmei series. And for those of you who don't know, Danmei is a type of Chinese fiction. In this case, tends to be BL, so boys love. And I've read several at this point, but none has stuck with me so much as Urha because it's absolutely unhinged. And again, I don't recommend this to people because it is so graphic and at times reprehensible. I think with Danmei, you've got to really go in with different expectations. It is probably not going to be like any other reading experience you've had as a Westerner, I will say that. This book is following Master Chuaning and disciple Moran, and we follow them as Moran off page, like this is when it first starts. Moran goes from a disciple to an absolute tyrant, kills Chuaning, and then kills himself, and then wakes up in his 15-year-old body, so he's living his life over, and he blames Chuaning for having gotten the love of his life killed. So there's this tension between master and disciple, especially now because this version of Moran remembers everything that happened in the past life, But what he's not expecting is that things as he lived them the first time might not be as they actually happen. Like, he remembers them in a specific way, but he didn't have all the facts. So we're following them over multiple years as they go from master and disciple to lovers, and it sounds nice, but again, it's unhinged. There are a lot of trigger warnings. Do research if it sounds like anything up your alley, but let me just say, like, it is so rewarding following these two idiots fall in love and recognize that love, and just the secondary character is also great, but they're at the heart of this book, and I am so excited to finish it. I've got volumes 9 and 10 ready to go, and then volume 11 I think comes out in March, so I'm probably going to binge them all at once. But yes, hopefully my feelings will stay the same. Moran and Chiwani. Prompt number 5 is actually the first of the ones I've added, and I'm taking the original magician prompt for this, but this is the Chariot, a very driven or motivated character. I had to go with Miss Achilles from Wrath Goddess Sing by Maya Dean. This book had a lot of drama going on around it when it came out a couple of years ago, and I didn't actually do much digging into it until last year. Having read it and kind of looked at like what was being said at the time, there were a lot of people saying very negative things about the representation of Achilles as trans, and also people having a problem with the depiction of Greek mythology. I'm not getting into that because I have my own thoughts, but Achilles in this, like, baby girl, she is so driven, and in many ways is selfish, and I think that adds a lot of nuance to her character, but she is driven to get what she wants. That could be a body that she feels comfortable in. It could be, you know, a romantic relationship. Ultimately, it's about power and recognition. She wants these things. She's going to get them. She's going to do whatever she can to elicit fear in her enemies. And she's not taking any prisoners. She's just like bubbling everybody down, sometimes to her detriment, because sometimes she gets so like single-minded on what she's doing that everyone else is kind of just like with the Chariot, like she runs over them. Achilles in this is so determined to thwart the gods at every turn, and she's not always able to do that, but she makes a hell of an attempt to, and it's really compelling watching her be just like superhuman and flawed, but also really admirable. And yeah, I just think she's a really fun character. Prompt number 6 is another one that I added, and that is The Hermit, a book that you read in one day. Because this one might not make quite as much sense, my logic behind this prompt was The Hermit is about solitude, and solitude that you've chosen, and I think taking the time to read a book in a day, intentionally doing so, it takes a lot of effort to, you know, shut out all the outside distractions just to finish a book in a day. But the book I chose for this prompt is Heart the Lover by Lily King. I read Riders and Lovers last year and didn't really like it that much, and I got this not knowing that they're actually connected because they follow the same main character just at different points in her life. And I fully think my having read Riders and Lovers influenced my feelings on this book. I think it gave me even more depth that I might not have had. But oh my god, this book broke me. I haven't like just wept over a book in years, I don't think. And it just, something about this hit me, and I found myself blowing through it. I read through it like in a morning and an afternoon, and it's not super long anyway, but I just didn't expect for that to happen. Like, I could not put it down, and it brought about a lot of thoughts and feelings that I wasn't expecting. So yeah, much better than Riders and Lovers, and it kind of has me curious to see what else King has, or what she'll publish in the future. But yeah, really, really loved Heart the Lover. Prompt number 7 is Justice, a book where you felt seen or recognized. I kind of knew what I was going to say for this one right away, because it's a book that I think about not super often, but when I do, it's always in a positive way because of how valuable the representation was for me. And that is Small Joys by Elvin James Mensa. I read this several years ago as an ARC and knew I was going to have to buy a finished copy because of just how much I adored it. It really is in ways almost plotless because you're just following this guy as he's making friends, and you're seeing him interacting with this new friend group, but he's also dealing with some family trauma and his sexuality and what he wants to do ultimately with life. If he wants to go back to school or, continue working. So it really is just about like being in your 20s and not entirely knowing what you're going to do. The reason this book has stuck with me so much, though, is because of a character named Muddy. He is the protagonist's best friend, and they form one of the most beautiful relationships like I've ever read about, because our main character does end up developing romantic feelings for Muddy, but only after he comes to love him as a friend. And even like when those feelings are acknowledged, it doesn't really affect their dynamic because, Muddy doesn't return them, but he loves our main character so much. And that got me thinking, like, as I read this, because it's not on the page, but it got me thinking that Muddy is very Arrow Ace coded. A lot of the language he uses to describe some of his past relationships and just love in general felt very authentic and genuine to me and my experiences with different relationships in my life. It's probably the only book at this point in my life where I have felt so validated in the depiction of this character, but also in his relationships and how they're so profound without being romantic. So yeah, highly recommend this one. It's called Small Joys, but it really is just a joy in general. Prompt number 8 is the last one that I've added, and that's going to be The Hanged Man, because I couldn't believe this was not in there. But The Hanged Man, and for that I am doing a book outside your comfort zone. I still don't know what compelled me to pick up First Position by Melanie Hamrick, because, and I'm not saying this in a disparaging way, but it is technically like women's fiction, which I know so often gets like a bad reputation or is like infantilized. It's considered, less serious, less literature. But something about this like really struck me from the premise, because it's following a ballerina who is dealing with different types of power dynamics in her life and the way that men are abusing her, and she's having to conform to their standards, all while she's trying to move up in this world of ballet and competing with more talented people or younger people. So it's a very toxic environment. I don't think it's a perfect book by any means, but it really was like a popcorn book. It's one that I just blew through and had an absolutely great time with. Even though it is not in a genre that I typically reach for, which is, again, more of like women's fiction. But having read this has made me open to trying other books in the genre and in others that I might, through my academic background, have been like encouraged to snub, because that is entirely what happens when you're in academia. But yeah, fun time. Prompt number 9 is Death, and that is a book that has profoundly changed you. No questions, no hesitation. It's The Mere Wife by Marie Devonna Hadley. This is my favorite book of all time. I have read it now 10 times since it came out in 2018. And it's changed the way that I view society, but also the way that I view the craft of writing. And not just writing a novel, but just writing a sentence. Hadley's prose at times is verbose, elegant, at other times it's blunt and overwritten. It's kind of like, it's a weird juxtaposition, and she walks that line to me like superbly. It's given me a lot to think about in how I go about crafting a sentence and what I think about language and words and the power of them, but also in just real life, like what in our society are we deeming monstrous as other? We're looking at this mindset of trying to keep the other at bay, to build up walls, to protect the people that matter. But that's often the front that you're putting on. That's another thing about this, is like monstrosity is such a big factor in this book. And the faces and the fronts that we put on to hide our monstrosity, to keep it unacknowledged, it's so fascinating. I have like annotated this book like no other. I don't think there is any page, hardly, that doesn't have a comment or a highlight of some sort. And every time I read this, I find something new to think about, to comment on, and my goal in life is to just get more people to read this, because I need to share the love for it. I did that at book club recently. And what I always say about The Mirror Wife is that it is not a perfect book, but it is a perfect book for me. Prompt number 10 is going to be for the devil, and that's a character that makes you want to scream because they are so frustrating. I had a hard time figuring out someone for this, but then I remembered good old Jem from the Godly Heathens duology. Listen, this duology is a lot, especially for young adult, and I appreciate that it is so intense and mature because the characters are 16, 17 and dealing with very grown-up traumas and experiences. And unfortunately in society that happens. And it's extremely valid, and it was validating to read something like this. But my God, Jem is a character. I think they're honestly going to be a turnoff for a lot of people. Like, from what I've read of some reviews, a lot of people don't like this book because of Jem, because of their voice, but also just the decisions they make. And yes, they are extremely frustrating. They are constantly making bad choices. But I think many times they're not justified. I think their mental health and their experiences play a really big role in how they view themselves and how they view the world. And is that the healthiest thing? No, not at all. But it makes their choices make sense, even if you still want to wring their neck. This is a really fascinating duology, though. It's following this group of teenagers who are the reincarnated figures of gods from like an alternate dimension. And it's vulgar, it's queer, it has a lot of really good representation. This first book especially I found really engaging. The sequel is a bit of a step down, but this book just kind of blew me away, even as I was frustrated and annoyed and sometimes just like questioning what the hell Jem was doing. I was fully engaged in their story, and I think that's the mark of a compelling character. Final 3. Okay, so prompt 11 is The Tower, and this is for a book that breaks a certain stereotype. I don't see too many people talk about this book, but that's A Far Better Thing by H.G. Pari. This is a reimagining of A Tale of Two Cities, which I care nothing about. That aspect did not draw me in, but what did is the fact that this is about changelings, because my work in progress, my novel, is looking at the figure of the changeling. But we're following this guy who encounters his changeling on the street, and they're not supposed to ever meet because the fairy world and the human world are two very different places. They're meant to be kept separate, except for these children who were stolen and replaced with changelings, because these children, now adults, navigate the human world and do the fairies' bidding. And the reason I consider this breaking stereotypes and tropes is because of the depiction of the Fae in this. They are so unsettling in a way that is not overdone. It's very subtle, but it's the fact that, like, on the human plane, you can't ever really see them. They only really appear as like bends of light. You know something's there, but it's kind of like a head spin trying to actually put features together. And even in the Fae realm, while they're clear, like, it's still hard to look at them because they give off a lot of light. They're they're too perfect. And I think you see that a lot of times in different, fairy stories. But what you get here is the real sense of menace. They don't even have to do a lot. They're just unsettling in general. And it's because our main character, Sydney, is living at their whim and is having to toe the line so that he's not thrown into fairy prison. That's because that's a big threat for him. He's having to navigate all these different relationships with them and try to one-up them when he's been led to believe they are all-knowing. And I don't know, it's just a really fascinating depiction of fairies and fairy lore. I know H.G. Pari has looked at fairies in other books, and I actually have, I believe it's The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door of hers that I want to read. But yeah, really interesting depiction of fairies in this. Also just highly recommend this book. It's fantastic. Again, not many people talk about it that I've seen, but I definitely want to check out more from this author. Prompt 14 is The Star. That is a healing or inspirational book. I don't have the energy to get it off the top shelf, but I would have to pick Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Taussig. This is a biography that Taussig wrote detailing her experience with disability because she had a type of cancer as a child that left her paralyzed, I believe, from the waist down. And so it's just ultimately following her experience with disability and being an advocate for disability and just her going through her life. And it was so just really inspiring because you see the way that she has learned to not compensate for her disability, but she goes about life and doesn't let things slow her down. I remember when I read the book, there was talk in there about whether she could have children or not. Well, now she's had a child. It's not a book that I think about all the time, but certain things from it have like wormed into my way of thinking. Like one thing that she talks about that has stuck with me over the years is when she is talking about the, handicap stalls and bathrooms. They're larger, they have more room, they're easier to get in and out of. And I think a lot of times like able-bodied people just don't really think about it. They'll just go in one. But what do you do if like there is somebody with a disability needing to get in one and you're in there? Like you are putting them at a disadvantage. Yeah, it was a really good book. And the last prompt is for The Sun. This is to pick an author who you wish or think should be a household name because of just how good they are. I would be remiss if I did not say Natasha Pulley because she is my favorite living author. Look, I know that her books all follow a similar formula. I know that her anachronisms are not going to be for everyone, but my God, I just always have such a good time reading her books. The pining, the silliness, the way that she doesn't take herself too seriously. Like, it's such a delight reading anything of hers, and I'm so excited because I think it's in like August or September, The Salt King comes out, which, if I'm thinking correctly, might be her first like contemporary book. I know the only other book that she's written that's anywhere close to being contemporary is The Half-Life of Valerie Kay. And oddly enough, I think that's people's least favorite book of hers. It's one of my favorites. So I don't know what that says about me, but I'm really hoping that I enjoy The Salt King. And I hope that at some point there will be another book of hers, like The Watchmaker of Filigree Street. Another book that will come along and just hit a lot of people at the right time and just really introduce them to her backlog because she's doing so much. And again, is it all sort of similar? Yes, but like if you like the formula, you like the formula. How does one end the video? I always struggle with that. But this was a good time. I've been wanting to find a reason to film, and I love tarot. So I thought this was a good opportunity to bring reading and tarot together. And I'd like to do that again in the future. But if you've read any of these books, any of these authors, or if you're interested in the tarot deck that I talked about, I would love to hear your thoughts on books and tarot. Like, chime in. It'd be great to hear from you. But if you stuck around, thanks, and hopefully I will catch you soon.